Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to this episode of The Wisdom of, and my guest today is Akshay Nanavati. Now, Akshay and I met each other when we were both speaking at a conference in Austin. And we hadn't known each other before then, but I've been to Antarctica. I went down on a tourist ship, looked after by wonderful guides and things like that showed me around and let me really become deeply connected to how pristine and beautiful that part of the world is. And the Antarctica, to me, is just the best symbol we possibly have for the need for us to take better care of the planet, because it is such a pure and pristine place. And you think it might be about the icebergs and everything else. Truly, it's about the light. It's the most amazing light on the planet because the air is pure. And so, I like to talk about the Antarctic. And I thought, Akshay's been to the Antarctic, apparently. We could talk about the Antarctic, except Akshay spent 60 days by himself dragging a sled because he wanted to achieve this goal of traveling solo from coast to coast across the Antarctic, which many people believe is impossible. He spent 60 days out on the ice dragging this sled. And we'll talk about this before the medical people said, no, you're really at risk here, and we need to get you out. And that made me think, well, maybe he's different. Maybe there's something a little kind of different. And, just some interesting things. He's a Marine veteran, deployed, came back with PTSD, visited the suicidal spaces, became, addicted to drugs and depression, was really pushed to the brink, but has used that suffering to also realize a much greater purpose and a much greater sense of what he's doing. And so in this combination of neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality to help people recognize that fear is not something evil that we should be avoiding, but is actually a part of the pathway. He spent 17 days in darkness, total darkness and isolation. That by itself is an interesting experience. 100 days alone in the polar regions, dragged a 420-pound sled for 500 miles over 60 days before they got him out. He does extreme endurance events. Just before we started this recording, we were catching up and said, "How are you going?" He said, "Oh, yeah, I just finished 24 hours on a stepping machine, Akshay." And I go, "What are you training for?" He goes, "No, I was just doing it, for my own self kind of thing." So he's an author, he's a speaker, he's a great speaker. I think he was the best speaker at the conference that we were at together, and has deep insight that comes from lived experience. And we've been able to spend some time together, and this is going to be a fantastic episode and really worth tuning into to see what comes out of the other side of darkness, on the other side of light. So Akshay, I'm thrilled that we're able to do this together, and I'm able to have you on an episode of The Wisdom of. I know that we're going to see some fantastic insights shared with people that have the antenna up, the ears open, and are ready to hear some things. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, my friend. Truly an honor.
Yeah, it's fabulous having you talk about some things that most people can't even possibly contemplate or think through. And certainly we'll get to Antarctica and the expedition, and just how hard it is to get something like that to even happen, let alone try and do it. I know from the conversation we've had, you haven't totally shut off the possibility that it could be done based on what you've learned from from the first attempt. But I'm sure there's other things to negotiate before that was to happen again. But the Fearvana, which is really your business and now your life's work. I know you said before it's a combination of fear and nirvana, and fear is not the negative thing that everybody perceives it to be. But is there a precise moment or a specific experience when you realize fear was not your enemy but actually your greatest teacher. That's where the lessons were for you. That's where you could. So many people spend their entire lives trying to avoid the discomfort of fear. Is there a specific experience or moment where you really had that realization?
There, I'd say the birth of Fearvana, although it wasn't crystallized in that terminology at the time, was when I joined the Marines. Before this, I had a good upbringing, had great parents. We moved from India to Singapore to Austin, Texas, four different cities, three different countries by the time I was 13. And, they weren't extremely wealthy, but middle class upbringing, certainly not poor, didn't know any suffering. And after moving to Texas, I got very heavily into drugs and alcohol, was very self-destructive, cutting my arms, burning myself, lost two friends to addiction, was headed down that path myself until I saw the movie Black Hawk Down. And watching that movie planted a seed that changed my life. It got me out of drugs almost overnight. And despite flat feet, scoliosis, a blood disorder that two doctors told me would kill me in boot camp, I enlisted in the Marines. And it was scary, it was terrifying, it was brutal, it was extremely hard, lots of suffering. But that was my first exposure to the value of going to war with the self, of doing something hard, of doing something scary, of pushing my own limits to see what I would unearth about the human spirit when I do that. And that laid the foundation for everything I am today, and ultimately what led to Fearvana many years later.
Sure. You know, um, Black Hawk Down is, you know, could almost be described as a brutal movie.
Hmm.
What did
Hmm.
you see in it that kind of gave you that? Because that's a movie that pulled you out of a very dark place, right?
Hmm.
Do you know what you recognized in the movie that shifted you?
It was a very specific scene because it's a movie based on a true story.
Yeah.
And there's a scene in the movie where the second Black Hawk had crashed. There was a soldier, a pilot in there, Michael Durant, who was in that second Black Hawk. And thousands of armed enemy personnel were coming their way, and no other ground forces could come to protect him because they were trapped in a firefight ways away. Two Delta snipers, Gary Gordon and Randy Sugart, they were in a chopper, relatively safe, up in the air, and they volunteered to come to the ground, two men, to set up a defensive perimeter to protect Michael Durant from thousands of armed enemy personnel. They both died doing what they did, but Michael Durant is alive today because of them. And they received the Medal of Honor, which is the highest award for valor in the U.S. military, posthumously, of course, because they died for what they did. And that touched my soul. The kind of courage it takes to do that, the compassion to put somebody else's life above your own and die for it. But that was who they were, and the valor, the courage, it left a mark in me. It made me question the very selfish, meaningless, worthless existence I was living at the time and
Sure.
want to do something more.
And then, of course, the Marines was the logical place to go and find out how do you become that, I guess,
Yeah,
because they were
it,
modeling some level of training or
it was.
philosophy.
Yeah, they I mean the when after watching the movie, I read every book I could find on military life and combat. And in the military, separate from all the politics of the war, there's a lot that is wrong with the politics on all the wars that have happened. There's zero doubt about that. But in the military, we live for the good of the group, right from boot camp. When in boot camp, when somebody does something wrong, everybody gets punished for it. So of course there are moments you hate it, but you live for the good of the group. Your men and your mission matter more than your own well-being does. And that's profoundly beautiful to live in a world like that, as much as it sucks at times and it's miserable at times. When I was in Iraq, there were moments where I was tired. I didn't want to go on a mission, but you go because something is more important than your feelings and your well-being. And that is a gift that I couldn't be more grateful for to
Yeah.
experience that.
And so in Iraq, you were one of the people that goes out ahead of the troop, if that's the right name, to see if there's any explosive devices that are likely, that's obviously not the job everyone puts their hand up for.
It was a dangerous job to say the least. Yeah, I would have to walk in front of our vehicle convoys every time we hit a danger zone. Let's say a bridge, for example. Me and one of the Marine would walk first to clear the bridge before we'd wave the convoy through, get back in the vehicle, and go on our mission. But as you said, it was dangerous because if somebody were to get blown up first, it would probably be us. So it was a
Mm,
pretty dangerous job, to say the least.
mm. But it's the good of the group, right? And
Exactly.
men and mission, if you like, as you said. So, is there, if you think about Fearvana as a system for transformation,
Mhm.
um, and you know what this, it's interesting because you're actually leveraging fear and stress,
Mhm.
and a lot of the approaches are to reduce or avoid fear and stress. and you're leveraging that. Tell us a little bit about Fearvana as a system for transformation.
I defined Fearvana as the bliss that results from engaging our fears to pursue our own worthy struggle. And what I mean by our own worthy struggle is our chosen path. So
Mm,
it could be writing a book, it could be seeing across Antarctica, playing the guitar, playing basketball, whatever it may be. When you pursue anything worthwhile, it will be hard. And to get something you've never gotten before, you're going to have to do something you've never done before. That's going to require risk. Risk is inherently scary. So the fundamental philosophy and the ethos of Fearvana is to combat the demonization of not only fear, but struggle and suffering of any kind, and every one of the sisters of fear, stress, anxiety, every one of those, and recognize they're not bad. They are just part of the human experience because there are no bad or good emotions. There's only emotions, and it's up to us to decide what we do with them. So,
mm,
what Fear On is all about is to help people reframe their relationship to fear, to stress, to anxiety, and develop a positive relationship to suffering of any kind to find, live, and love their worthy struggle. And
mm.
that's really what it is all about, finding, living, and loving your path. And you do that, life becomes a beautiful adventure.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There are a lot of people that work in this space or similar spaces will say there are no bad or good emotions. That's very commonly said. But then what is usually said after that is there are just productive and unproductive emotions. So they're not bad or good, that's a judgment. But do they help you or hinder you? Are they productive or unproductive? You said, interestingly, actually, there's just emotions. Now, typically, when people say there's just productive and unproductive emotions, they would lump fear and stress
Yeah.
into unproductive. They're not helping you,
Mm.
and they would lump joy and excitement and everything into productive. They're going to help you. You're actually challenging that notion. You're saying there's just emotions, and actually, fear can be quite productive if I'm understanding you correctly.
Absolutely. Fear is a beautiful tool. I'll give you a very clear example. When I wrote the book Fearvana, I was terrified. I was scared. It was my first book. I'm putting it out in the world. I was scared it's going to be bad. People are going to judge me. Do I get a one-star review on Amazon? So to leverage that fear, I engaged it. I wrote down, what am I scared of? Why am I scared? What's the worst case scenario? And because I used my fear, one of my core mantras is when you engage it, fear propels you to prepare. So I prepared. I studied from authors like Jack Canfield, the Chicken Soup for the Soul author, Tim Ferriss. I studied how do you write a good book. And because I was scared of writing a bad book, I ultimately wrote a book that was worthy of being endorsed by the Dalai Lama.
Mm,
Because my fear drove me to writing a better book. Everything I do, even going to Antarctica, it's a useful thing to be scared. It'd be incredibly stupid if I'm not scared. So even in Antarctica, I wrote down every single thing that could go wrong. Astronauts actually do this a lot too. They call it negative visualization. We've all heard of positive visualization, visualize the outcome you want, but it's equally valuable to visualize everything you think that can go wrong, and then you can use your fear to prepare for it. So I'm scared of failure. I'm scared of death. When you have a positive relationship to fear, these tools become beautiful mechanisms to awaken the true gift of life.
mm.
The key is you want to engage your fear, not demonize it, not resist it, not fight it.
It's interesting that Dalai Lama said Fearvana inspires us to look beyond our own agonizing experiences. That's actually a pretty amazing statement.
It's
Look
very
past
humbling.
the agonizing experience. It's interesting in competitive sport, whether that's a combat sport or a team sport or a ball sport or something. The best coaches generally try to um, simplify their athletes' decisions
Mm,
down to a binary pathway.
mm,
So, in the moment of contact, you just have a choice to make: defend or attack.
mm,
Right? It's a
mm.
binary pathway, and the read of the circumstances tells you what to do. It's not, attack at all costs, which would be pursue your goal in life, attack at all costs. Sometimes defend, right? Deal with what is overwhelming you,
Yeah.
and then you'll find a way out of that. Often they'll say, if you defend long enough, you wear out the attack, which is really interesting from a sports coaching perspective. If you defend long enough, you
Mm,
usually wear out the attack. And so a lot of sports are won in defense, which is
yeah.
like the dark side, right? Everything's on top of you, and then you find your way forward. So this duality, if you like,
Yeah.
of one to the other, this bouncing backwards and forth is pretty fascinating. A lot of people test their thinking, in classrooms, boardrooms, workshops. You decide to trek across Antarctica to
Hmm.
test your thinking.
Hmm.
What comes out of these highly uncomfortable settings you put yourself into that give you a deeper sense of insight and wisdom that you just can't get when you're thinking it through in a boardroom or a classroom or even in a market, active market? It's still pretty
Yeah,
safe compared to some of the things you've done. What is
yeah.
it you really get from these extreme experiences you put yourself through?
Great question. When you're in the depths of suffering and solitude, like Antarctica, it breaks down the masks we wear in this world to move through reality. The nature of suffering is it is painful. It is very, very painful. And that pain is so pure. It's so raw. It sheds any constructs you have of your identity and reveals a great truth about the human soul, about the human spirit. And the draw of why I keep going back to these experiences, I mean, when I do them, there's moments of absolute misery, pure hell. I mean, I'm in terrible pain mentally, physically, emotionally, especially in Antarctica. But I keep returning because it's in those moments you tap into something so pure about the human spirit. In the movies, you'll see you have to battle a dragon to unearth a treasure. The bigger the dragon, the greater the treasure. So I go out there to battle the biggest dragons I could find to unearth the greatest treasures of the human soul, the human
Mm.
spirit. For me, it's a very spiritual pursuit. When you're in those raw places, every construct of your identity is shed. It becomes pure experience. You tap into something truly profound and you find oneness in all of it. I had moments in Antarctica where I'd be having tears streaming down my face because even though I was as alone as a human being could be, literally geographically the most isolated human being on the entire planet, but feeling more connected to myself, to God, to my family back home, to all of humanity, to the human spirit. And you experience what I call the paradox of oneness. You
Mm.
experience it viscerally. And what the paradox of oneness is, you mentioned dualities. In life, there are a series of dualities that encompass the human experience. There's light and dark, life and death, pain and pleasure, ego, humility, control, surrender, so on and so forth. And the paradox of oneness is the visceral realization that these opposites are not truly opposites, but true two expressions of the same whole. And you see that they're not contrasting, just like fear and nirvana, they're not enemies of each other. They're actually part of something greater. And all unnecessary suffering is caused by resisting or clinging to either edge of every duality. So if you cling to joy, you're going to suffer when there's moments without it. If you resist pain, you're going to suffer when it inevitably shows up. But when you free yourself from resisting to clinging, which these experiences have allowed me to do in a very visceral way, not just a conceptual way, in a deep, embedded, knowing way, you free your mind to pure experience and you experience oneness.
Yeah, let me. I want to draw this as a model. I mean, you've kind of led me into a thought process,
Yeah.
and we're known for being able to take the most complex things
Mm.
and then turn them into really powerful visual models that just explain it so simply. And for those that might be listening, I'll speak through the model as we go. So, one of the things that um, we we try to do in life is it's almost this spiral heading upwards from quite small at the bottom to very
Mm.
large at the top. We start out with this kind of narrow spiral at the bottom, which is where we're at today, and we want to end up at this wide spiral at the top where we've done amazing things, we've lived a life that's memorable, we've had an extraordinary journey, and we get to the end of our days, and people say, "Wow, what a life!" This broad, wide spiral at the top that's rich and full. And we
Mm.
started at a very narrow um, spiral at the bottom. And so
Mm.
this idea of spiral is interesting because it gives rise to two guardrails that actually define the spiral on either
Mm.
side. And you've named them as dark and light. And we
Mm.
might rename them in a minute. But life is this idea of bouncing from, light to dark to light to dark to
Mm.
light to dark. and so on. And one of the challenges with this is, each one of these steps, so light on the left-hand side, dark on the right-hand side, sorry, dark on the left-hand side, each time you go up a level across the spiral, that place that you're at is going to head you off into the new place you need to get to, but you have to let go of what got you there in the first place.
Yeah.
So you've got to take the lessons from the dark and then be willing to let that go now and move to light. And light is, I'm going to get your labels on this in a minute because I think you have some interesting labels for it. But light is, how wonderful is this? And things are great, but you don't just go straight up to the next level. You go back to the dark again that is attached to that light and have that experience, learn from it, then let it go. You've got to let go of the light to go to the dark, let go of the dark to go back to the light. It's this constant process of letting go of what got you there in the first place. And so is this making some sense first as a simple geometry of this?
This is beautifully put. I'm deeply fascinated by
So,
the way you embodied this and codified it.
so what we've got here is geometry, because
Yeah.
geometry actually tells a story of dynamics.
Mm.
But let's relabel dark and light through the lens of your experience.
Yeah.
And so what would you call, I mean, we've got fear, we've got suffering, what would you, if we put a label on dark so people kind of knew what it was, what label would we put on dark?
I think if you look at it from the lens of a meta duality, dark and light is a good one because there's a series of dualities, right? You can
Yeah.
call it the core driving forces of human behavior are pain and pleasure. So everything stems from some flavor of that as well, which you could call in dark and light. But what I often call this when I'm working with people to help them explore another edge of a duality that is causing them friction, I call it your sacred edge. And that is the edge that is the one that every part of you, every version of this identity resists because you're so comfortable on one side there and you want to
Okay.
stay there.
So let's you've given me more geometry to play with.
Yeah,
And this is
please.
what happens when we're building a model, right? You're giving me more geometry to play with.
I
If I
love this.
break the vertical of that
Yeah,
spiral up into three sections now, we are driven at a base level by fear and desire.
yeah,
And that's hardwired at infancy. We're born with that,
yeah,
actually. And so, perhaps that's the phase one of dark and light
yeah.
is almost this fear and desire, and maybe that's the less mature level of this
Mm,
model.
hmm.
You've talked about the sacred edge. Would
Yeah.
you say that is in the middle, or would you say that that's ultimately at the top where people get to?
I think the sacred edge is the ever prevalent, those two lines on the side there, they are constantly the sacred edge, but they expand as you go up there, right? As you evolve,
Okay.
and your experience of light goes deeper and deeper into the edges of light and deeper into the edges of dark. You got to go further to experience the edge anymore. Like, for example, why did I want to go spend 60 days in alone in Antarctica? Because my edge had been further expanded beyond like the other things I had done before. I needed to go further and further out to now touch that edge.
So finding the sacred edge between dark and light
Yeah.
expands the width of your spiral.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
so the width of the spiral is what is defined by the sacred edge that you find between dark and light.
Yeah.
Babies and children, and even teenagers, actually, maybe through to the teenage years, are trying to figure out the simplicity of fear and desire.
Yeah.
What gets me in trouble? What makes me
Yeah.
happy?
Yeah.
Um, you talk a little bit about suffering,
Yeah.
and so then beyond fear, suffering might be a deeper level of darkness. This is not just fear now. This is actually real suffering. And
Yeah.
I know that you and I spoke before about, joy,
Yeah.
the duality between suffering and joy. But once again, the sacred edge is having,
Uh,
maybe the sacred edge is the ability to let go of what got you to that level, let go of the suffering, move to the joy, experience that,
yeah.
find out that you're now settling,
Yeah.
be willing to let go of the joy to go back to the suffering. Maybe that is the sacred edge, that ability to do
Yeah.
this. Is this making
Absolutely.
some sense?
It makes a lot of sense. It's beautifully constructed into this visual framework here, but it makes a lot of sense.
So
That's ultimately,
what if we went right to the top? Is there is there a level of dark beyond suffering that is someone who's great at this, someone who really get like think about yourself, right?
Mm.
Is there a dark beyond suffering that you know is worth exploring because there's going to be real juice found in that?
I think the ultimate sacred edge, I was actually working with a friend about this recently, is when you get clear on the constructs that shape your identity. So actually let me step back a second. So there's ultimately not one reality that shapes our reality. There's two
Yes,
realities. There's an objective reality and a constructed reality.
yes,
Now, most of our reality is our constructed reality. It's the beliefs, the mental models, the
yep,
paradigms, the experiences we've shaped how we perceive our reality. From the simplest way to why is this a white wall? Because I've been taught this is a white thing
yeah,
and this thing is a wall, right? So these constructs shape our identity. So once you go further and further and further up the spiral, you're actually, the more you start to see how these dualities can coexist as one, you start to free yourself from these constructs. And the ultimate sacred edge is because as you peel off, like think of the layers of an onion, as you peel off every construct, every version of your constructed reality, you get to something beyond, beneath all of these constructs. And where I'm going with that is I think the ultimate sacred edge is the void. There's a void of stillness that I believe is perhaps the greatest human fear. There's a great French philosopher who would echo this when he says, all of humanity's problem stems from man's inability to sit by himself in a room alone.
yeah,
And I think if you look at human behavior, it's hard to argue this. It's not a fear. If you ask people, nobody's going to say stillness, or very few will, but their behaviors, even Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul.
yeah,
And I think that's the ultimate sacred edge, is confronting the void beneath all the constructs that we create
sure.
of our life experiences.
And then, so if the void is the dark side of that ultimate sacred edge, what is the light side? So when you confront the void, what then often comes from that?
I think when you peel back the layers of the constructs that shape our life experience, are the illusion of that reality, you become the creator of your own illusion. So to me, that fundamental, a deep existential question that we've all heard, who am I? Right? We start usually with the surface level layers, but to me, the answer of that question, who am I, is I am the creator of my own illusion.
Sure. You
And
know, so it's
that,
interesting.
yeah, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I'll just finish that point is that at first you become aware of the constructs, then you can peel off the constructs. And once you get comfortable with the void, it's kind of like this top down, bottom up effect, right? So top down, I peel off the constructs, get to the nothingness, the void. And once I can sit with that, be okay with that, stop resisting it, stop clinging it, then I can work back up. Because constructs are not bad. They're valuable in how we move through reality. So this is not to demonize constructs or the illusion of our reality, but you become the creator of it. And
Yeah.
that's where you seize true agency over your life.
So I'd love to play with it for a moment
Yeah.
and run choreography of the model
Yeah.
to see if it catches what you're sharing with people. And so if we talk about this, people live their lives trying to climb a spiral of life success from the
Mm.
narrow spiral that they're exposed to when they're born and their children to the broad and wide spiral of an enriched life at the top, from bottom to top. That's what people are trying to do. What people don't necessarily realize is there are guardrails on either side of that spiral determines how wide the spiral becomes and how rich
Mm.
the life becomes. And the tension between those two guardrails is what we call the sacred edge that people
Mm.
need to find and pursue in order to be able to make the guardrails as wide as possible and have as much success as possible.
Yeah.
The guardrails is darkness on one side and light on the other, darkness on the left and light on the right. And we tend to move towards one side or the other. So as we move towards light and we have an experience on light, that lifts us up a level and has us feel great. But that position then exposes us to dark on the other side. What if we were to lose that? What if it were to go wrong? And we need to go to the dark side and deal with what is going on over there. And the
Yeah.
truth is, this spiral is a constant process of letting go of what got you to the level you're at in the first place, whether that's light or dark. And
Yeah.
so, in the first stage of this model, the lowest level of this model, we might call this the compliance level.
Mm,
This is, when we're children, teenagers, and we're really moving between fear and desire. What people basically see as the two primary emotions. How
mm,
do I avoid what scares me, and how do I
yeah,
get more of what I really, really want? And we see this
yeah,
from the moment babies are born, right?
yeah.
And through to teenage
Yeah.
years and young adulthood. But as people mature, they move into the next phase of this, and we might call this the construct phase. This is
Mm,
where we're actually living in a world full of constructs that we've been given,
yeah,
frames of reference that we have around the world, about the world around us. And
yeah.
at this level, fear turns into suffering. Actually, it's fear is false evidence appearing real. Perhaps suffering is real, and so there's a level of suffering that we have to learn from, take the experiences from, to take it across to the light and turn it into real joy, because
Mm,
joy motivates and propels.
mm,
And as we move through that middle level, that second stage, we move into this third stage, which is actually the sacred edge, and we're beyond construct. And not everyone gets to this level, but the people that do get to that level recognize that the dark on this is the void,
mm,
meaning just you with nothing else around you as a construct, and you
mm,
just see your soul. You
mm,
really actually see who you are on the
yeah,
dark. And
yeah,
on the light, it's about creation, your ability to create
yeah.
and make real. You're not waiting for someone else to bring joy to your life, which is inside the construct. You actually create. And so it's
Mm,
this shift from compliance to construct to sacred edge. And it's a
mm.
spiral, and it gets wider the better you're able to manage the duality of light and dark, and ultimately suffering and joy and the void and creation. As you hear that back, is that a fair summary of what we're trying to explain to people?
That's an epic summary. I just got a big smile on my face because it's such a beautiful way you created this framework around these concepts. You're a true master at your craft, my friend. That was epic.
It starts with geometry. Geometry actually does a lot of heavy lifting. But, when you find the right geometry, the most
Mm,
complex things actually start to tell their own story. But I
mm,
can't let us pass this moment. Now, I promise everybody, I'm going to ask Akshay about Antarctica, because everybody wants to know what a 60 days in the Antarctic with a 240
yeah.
pound sled look like. But I'd love you to talk a little bit about 17 days in two different chunks of time in total darkness by yourself. We live in a world today where people are looking for anything they can find to get an edge, whether
Mhm.
it's psychedelics or meditation, or people are trying everything they can find.
Mhm.
And you've made the comment to me in the past, you don't need psychedelics if you live with yourself in a dark room by yourself for 17 days. Talk
Absolutely.
about this. Actually, just give people the setup so that they understand that it really was you with no sensory input for I
Yeah.
think, was it 11,
7 days, 7 days the
7 days, and then,
first time, 10 days the
yeah.
second time.
So
And it's
people understand the physical arrangement. So there's absolutely no sensory stimuli for you, and you are by yourself with your thoughts in total darkness for
Mhm.
10 days in one hit and 7 in the other. So just and what is it that does for you when you do that?
Yeah, so a little bit about the logistics. You're in a small, tiny room. It's so dark you cannot see your hand in front of you. That's how it's pitch darkness 24/7 for the entire time. And when you're in that level of darkness, you start to hallucinate. In fact, the brightest light I've ever seen was in the darkness. It was so bright, I was shielding my eyes because it was blinding me. And why I chose this experience is when you're in this level of darkness, you are shutting off one of the primary ways in which we engage with reality, with the world, our visual sense. So even if I'm in a silent retreat, let's say, I can still see outside and say, that's a white wall, that's the sky. My mind has something external to latch onto. In the darkness, there's nothing external to latch onto. So you go within.
Yeah,
And it's the deepest, most profound journey within that you'll ever take because there's nothing to do. Unlike Antarctica, when yes, I was alone, but there was a mission occupying my consciousness, right? That there was a journey, there was a path. In darkness, there is no mission. You're just sitting there. And without any mission, without any purpose other than just being sitting still fully with yourself, you go into the places of yourself that you very rarely accessed, if ever. And that's what drew me to it, to see what I would find on the other side of those doors.
mm, So there's like a airlock and so the food's put in there and all that
Oh
sort of.
yeah. So as far as the food, I chose to do a juice fast. When I did the 10-day retreat, I did 8 days of juice and last 2 days no calories because I wanted to add hunger to the experience as well. So the way it works is of
Good
course I
on
did.
you.
There's a double door system. So they open the door from outside, put a juice in this little kind of box. When the door closes, there's no light. So you can hear the kind of knock and then you open the inner door, grab your juice. So the key is you don't want any exposure to light because it'll actually destroy that hallucinogenic type experiences. And the lights you see, they start taking shapes, and you can call it what you want, maybe consciousness, God speaking to you. Those shapes are formations that reveal perhaps some message to you. And that's part of the draw about these darkness retreats is to see that.
Yeah.
And so that's why you don't want any exposure to light.
And you're making notes while you're in there?
I actually was journaling as well. So I had just a notebook with the ruler and I would write and then move it down. Obviously, it wasn't in the lines. My handwriting is barely legible in the light, but thankfully it was legible enough to understand it. And what came through those journals was it was almost as if like there were passages I would reread later that I don't remember writing. My
Right.
book, Fearvana, I felt like I wrote that book, but what came in the journals was almost like it got channeled through me through whatever means, and it moved me to tears reading some of those passages
Wow.
after. Not
And
profound.
and so, if people were thinking about, I'm going to go and sit in darkness by myself, is there a period of time, quite often with, over the years, people have done these experiences where you don't speak for 15 days,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you'll go to a retreat and no one talks and that sort of thing.
yeah.
Um, People will, I am constantly in the process of what I call a complaint-free challenge. I wear this um, rubber wrist strap, and the idea is to try and go 21 days without complaining. And if you complain, you've got to swap wrists and start again. I think it took me 8 months to get to my first 21 days, right? And I'm a pretty positive person. I thought I'd
Yeah,
kind of knock it off fairly quickly.
yeah,
But, it takes like 10 days before it actually starts to become the way you think about things.
yeah.
People often say, after about 3 days of not speaking at all, then in the darkness, is there a period of time where you felt like you had to get over that for the real discoveries to
Yeah.
start to occur?
The real intense experiences started happening after day 5. So the first time I went in, I was going to do 5 days, but the lady who ran the darkness retreat, the first time I did it was in Germany, second time in Mexico. The lady who ran that darkness retreat center recommended, she said, look, you can do what you want, but I recommend doing at least 7 days because the most intense experiences will hit after 5. And in both cases, I found that to be true. The first day and a half, most of us are in some degree of sleep debt. We're all busy striving, right? So the first day and a half, you sleep a ton. I
Right.
just slept. Every time I woke up, I'm like, sweet, I have nothing to do. I'm just going to go back to sleep. But eventually you've slept out all that that debt and now you have to face yourself. So I've heard some people say 3 days, but honestly, if you do 3 days, you're going to be thinking about leaving the second you kind of get out of that sleep debt. So you want to spend, I would suggest not less than 7, which of course I get is intense, but that's the intensity is part of it. It's part of the experience. It's part of the journey within.
Isn't that even an interesting observation?
Yeah.
That so many of us are so busy
Yeah.
and so kind of on the edge of um, rested. We're
Yeah.
not rested. We're not fully rested. That you would just sleep for a day and a half, to
Yeah.
almost catch up and get.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how many people talk about meditate? I find it really difficult to meditate because as soon as I start meditating, I fall asleep. That's a
Yeah.
really interesting observation because you're living in constant sleep debt, right?
Exactly.
Would it be
Exactly.
difficult to meditate if you didn't have any sleep debt
Yeah.
necessary? It's sort of fascinating. Let's talk about what I'm sure a lot of people want to actually hear about, which is trying to cross the Antarctica or the Antarctic, cross Antarctica on foot with a 420-pound sled.
Mhm.
I don't know what that is in kilos.
190, about 190
190
kilos.
kilos, right? That you're dragging behind you. And I know when you first spoke about it, I thought, well, I've been to the Antarctic. It's snow and ice and it's flat. And okay, it's a long way, like
Yeah.
1,700 kilometers or something.
2,700 kilometers. 17.
2,700 kilometers,
Yeah.
1,700 miles or something like, yeah. But, and, look, it'd be hard, but, you know, it's ice and snow, and once you get it moving, surely. And of course, it's nothing like that. So tell us the story of trying to cross Antarctica by yourself on foot on a on a an expedition that largely most people believe is impossible to achieve.
Mhm. It had never even been attempted before, let alone completed. So this was the world's first attempt of this expedition. It took me 4 years of preparation from the moment I had the idea to train, to build up the skills. I had dabbled in polar exploration. I did a 1 month ski crossing of Greenland, 550 kilometers, 190-pound sled many years ago. So I got a taste of polar travel. And from the moment I decided, though, this was a different level of commitment. We had to raise $1.1 million from scratch to fund it because it had never even been attempted before. We were pushing the boundaries if possible. So the months, even years of research into food testing. I went on series of training expeditions in Greenland and Iceland and the Arctic. I've lost 2 fingers to frostbite on a training expedition in Antarctica 4 years ago, my first time in Antarctica. I mean, I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on training expeditions. The 1.1 million was just for the final expedition and building up training strength, training endurance, creating a logistical plan, a route plan, a food plan, every piece of gear, trying to look for ways to save weight to the point that I was cutting my toothbrush in half to save 5 grams. I cut my tag off my shirt to save another 2 grams. I had one layer the whole time for one base layer the whole time to just to save weight, no carrying, not carrying any extra gear. So the level of preparation and honestly, like getting to Antarctica was in many ways harder than actually in Antarctica, just getting to the starting line. Because doing all of those things at the same time, training strength, endurance, food, gear, all of it, while raising $1.1 million, every one of those things could have been a full-time job. To do all of it at the same time, I was blessed with an unbelievably supportive wife who you met, unbelievable army of supporters who helped us raise the funds, who supported in every way that it took really thousands of people coming together who believed in the possibility of the human spirit pushing the edge. Even if it was an impossible expedition, and even polar adventurers told me anyone who attempts this will probably fail. So I knew the odds were stacked against me because of how hard it is. And having tasted it, it was indescribably hard. It was so brutal. It was just unrelenting every single day. Not only was I dragging 420-pound sled, but from day one, I was going uphill.
Yeah.
And that in soft snow was just, it's hard to put
So
into words.
let's step this through for folks a little bit,
Yeah.
because the route itself is has a mountain at one end, and then it has a much larger portion of the route that is more flat, starting from the other end. But weather, of
So,
course, in Antarctica actually rules. It determines what happens.
yeah.
And so the plan you originally had couldn't happen.
Hmm.
And you also were going to spend more money doing this. So you end up having to raise even more just to get to the starting line. So let's complete that
Sure.
startup part of it and the decision about which way you went. Then we'll
Sure.
talk about the actual experience itself.
Yeah. So, I was doing coast to coast. So starting on one coast, going via the South Pole, the bottom of the world, going to the other coast. So the one coast that I ended up starting on meant climbing from day one, but that was easier to get to because of weather. It was closer to the main base camp in Antarctica called Union Glacier. So to paint the logistical picture, I flew from Punta Arenas, Chile, one of the geographically most southern cities in the world, to Union Glacier. And from there, the side I started on was a short flight. The other side of Antarctica was a 12-hour flight where you have to stop in the middle of Antarctica twice to refuel the plane. So, which means you need good weather in 4 spots: the takeoff spot, the 2 refueling stops, and the landing on the other side. Good weather in 4 spots in Antarctica is very, very hard to get. So, we didn't get that good weather window. But had I started on the other side, I would have had about 30 days of flat terrain before I start climbing. And so I truly believe if there's any way to do it, and even then, it's still a brutally hard expedition. But if there's any way to do it, you have to start on the other side. And the fact of the matter is, when we got to Union Glacier, there was bad weather consistently, and every day I didn't get started, I was eating into a potential day out there, which
Yeah.
also meant now the daily average gets exponentially higher. As it is, you're doing one of the hardest, not one of the hardest expedition ever done. The sled I pulled was the heaviest sled any man's pulled from that coast of Antarctica. So to do that was so difficult, and we just didn't get the weather window, which I kind of knew would happen because I just know that how it happens in Antarctica. But we were hoping for the best.
But you're not necessarily pulling the sled the whole time. So this idea that I had, from the warmth of a ship, okay, okay, that's snow and ice. Wouldn't you just drag the sled across? Sometimes it was you just physically manhandling because it's not all flat. It's not all easy. So share the experience with us. The
Yeah.
struggle, the suffering of
I'll
those
give you
60 days.
I'll give you an example of that. There was a few days where we also got hit with some of the worst snow conditions in modern Antarctic history. Every expedition out there was struggling way more, taking longer than normal. And there was days out there where every 3 steps, my two sleds, so I had two sleds, and they would sink in the soft snow. I'd fight them out with, all my might pulling them, and then 3 steps later they'd get stuck again. And then I'd do this again, and this would go on and on and on for over 9 hours a day. So I was doing this skiing for about an average to 9 to 10 hours a day, pulling these sleds uphill in soft snow that they would get stuck in. And they were 4 times on the expedition where I crossed 20 kilometers, which was a distance I desperately needed to hit to have any chance of pulling off this crossing. 4 times, and then that night it would snow. I would wake up out of my tent, look out the tent, see new snow on the ground, and just know I'm about to endure an absolutely miserable day, an absolutely hellish day. But the mental struggle of it was so brutal because I was giving everything I had to this, and there was just nothing you could do to go any faster. The first time I crossed 20 kilometers was on day 20, actually. I hit 21.9 kilometers, and the snow got so brutal that I went from 21.9 to 17 to 14 to 13, putting in the same amount of time because it was so hard. And not only does that mean you're now putting the same amount of time, your distances are dropping, it's taking so much more of a toll on the body.
Mm.
And what eventually happened over the last 10 days, the body was falling apart. I had chest pain, spine pain. I had days where I was stumbling out there as if I was drunk, falling over. I thought I could faint out there. Other days where I couldn't catch my breath. It felt like I was sprinting after just 2 steps. And finally, on day 58, I had shooting pain in my lower left gut that I later found out was diverticulitis, which is infection in the colon, that if left untreated, it can burst and get in the bloodstream, get septic, and kill you, which is actually what happened to an adventurer very tragically 8 years ago. It did burst, and he died. And
Mm.
so I literally pushed the body to the edge of death after 58 days. And I tried moving one more time on day 60. And when the gut pain hit at pretty much within 20 minutes of skiing, at that point, we called it. And but I knew by about day 45 or day 48 that I could no longer get to the other end of Antarctica. The map just wasn't there, and I didn't have the time left to pull off the journey. So I just chose to stay out there just for the spiritual journey. But when it became life-threatening at that point, coming back home alive was always the number one priority.
Yeah. So let me just emphasize what you just said.
Yeah.
Um, you knew on day 48 you weren't going to complete the mission, and you chose to give it another 12 days anyway for the experience. This duality from finding the sacred edge between suffering and joy, the sacred edge between the void and
Yeah.
creation. So yeah, I'm not going to finish this mission, but what can I create if I stay out here? Then, of course, the question becomes what stops. What brings an end to what you're doing, and it's knowing that moment. Is there a piece of wisdom that stands above everything else that you gained from the Antarctic experience that would translate to young leaders today? The world is now moving into the hands of young leaders, and our job is to share whatever wisdom we've gained with them without judgment, and they'll put it to work in the best way they can. But is there a headline body of wisdom or piece of wisdom that you gained from the expedition that you would it'd be one of the first things you would say to a young leader who came to you and said, "Hey, actually help me kind of be a better leader," and you'd almost lead with this piece of wisdom that you gained from Antarctic?
Yeah. I'd say it'd be two things. The one which we touched on was the paradox of oneness.
Yeah.
Freeing your mind from dualistic thinking, labeling things as bad or good. When you release those judgments about things, you stop resisting or clinging, right? You don't say fear is bad, this experience was bad, this just is. And this line, if I think this is the core wisdom here, Acceptance of isness is the key to freedom from all unnecessary suffering. I'll say that again. Acceptance of isness is the key to freedom from all unnecessary suffering. When you free yourself from unnecessary suffering, and so what I mean by that is in Antarctica, when I had soft snow, it's very easy to say, I wish the snow was harder. And we do this all the time in other contexts. I wish things weren't this way. I wish this did not happen. Instead, I would say, thank you, God, for these perfect conditions. Because everything is perfect in its isness, because it can't be anything other than what it already is.
Mm.
So thank you for these perfect conditions. By accepting what is, you can then build on your own reality. You can create your own reality. So the two parts is one is releasing dualistic thinking, and that's a practice. It comes with practice by training your mind to say this is not good or bad. I just accept what is. And the other part is what we also touched on, but recognizing the distinction between objective reality and constructed reality, because when you do that you can get clear, as you mentioned, we went as you rise up that spiral, right? The more you get comfortable doing that, you can create your own constructs. I'll give you a very normal example of this. After Antarctica, I went to the dentist to do a cleaning. And dentist is not inherently an enjoyable experience, right? And so I started breaking this down. What's actually happening here? Let me break it down from a top-down layer. I've created a predictive mechanism that says this is an experience of dread. Why? Am I actually in pain here? And I would break it down to what's objectively actually happening. It wasn't actually that painful. I've been in way worse pain. It was just a cleaning. They weren't doing anything deep, but there was a dread that I was feeling because our brain predicts experiences based on past experiences. So I would break it down. Okay, what's my body actually feeling? I am labeling this dread, but I could choose to label this an opportunity. And suddenly I started falling in love with that experience in the dentist's chair because it became an opportunity for mental mastery.
Yeah.
So by breaking it down into the core layers, what neuroscientists will call interoception. Interoception is your body's physiological mechanism to a stimuli. And then from that layer, I would then go into the next layer, which is what neuroscientists would call affect. So affect is consists of pleasure and displeasure and either calm or intense arousal. So valence and arousal. So I break this down and I'm going through this in my head. Okay, the constructed reality is that it is displeasant. But if I change the way I label this emotion, I can actually change it from unpleasant to pleasant and say this is an opportunity. There's a gift here. Instead of dread, I'm going to label this emotion differently. Because when you label an emotion, that is not actually labeling your experience, it's actually creating your experience.
Yeah.
So when I say excitement instead of fear, it changes my experience. So that's what I would say would be my core wisdom is reconstructing your reality and then freeing yourself from dualistic thinking. You do that, the world is yours.
We could label the top of that spiral conscious reality. The middle bit
Exactly.
is constructive reality, and the bottom is compliant reality.
I love
We're
that.
told who to be and what to be in that
Yeah.
lower stage. The middle bit is constructed reality. And in a world where everyone's talking about, unusually for this podcast, we haven't spoken about AI once. We haven't
Yeah.
spoken about social, political, um, you know, uh, military upheaval across the world,
Yeah.
because many of these things are in that constructed reality phase, tools, tips, tricks, hacks. But we've been talking about conscious reality. How do you consciously craft, or even the crafted reality? How do you craft reality based on the void and creation? Your ability to craft the reality you're actually going to operate in. It's a really, really powerful way of thinking about things and exploring things. And the dentist is a great example because most people hold a fear of the dentist, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet most people have actually experienced more pain at other points, physical pain
Yeah.
at other points in their life than they do when the dentist just hits the wrong part of the tooth for about that amount of time, right? Like if you've ever broken a bone, and I've broken many because I've had my own kind of adventurous
Yeah.
years, that is way more painful
Yeah.
than that moment when the dentist kind of
Exactly.
hits something with, and so we turn it into something that it doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
And so that wisdom passed on to these, to the younger leaders that are going to carry the world for us, I think is super, super important. I'd love to wrap up with three quick questions, like quick question, quick response, so people will know you a bit more,
Okay.
and then we'll call it an end to the episode. Is that okay? You willing to play this little game with me?
Sounds great. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm pretty sure when you were a child, you didn't go, here's what I'm going to be when I grow up, right? So when you were a child, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up, if you actually had that thought process?
I actually wanted to be an astronaut for a long time. I had a telescope and was very fascinated with the great beyond.
Okay, so you were already attracted towards things that you would have known had inherent risk.
Unknown. Yeah, it just was fascinating to me. That was for a long time. That was kind of the path. I guess maybe like many children do, but that was definitely an exciting path for me.
Sure. What
Yeah.
about you're a student of the human condition and you're a student of the world. If you could time travel to any period in history and just
Mm.
fly on the wall and really learn from being able to observe it, what part of human history fascinates you? You'd love to be able to go back to it and just really observe it.
It's a great question. I'm a big fascinated by military history. I think, coming back to what I said earlier, war reveals the extremes of the human condition for better or for worse. So perhaps like Spartan culture or samurai culture,
Yeah,
drawn to warrior cultures and what allowed them to live with virtues and courage in the way they did, and also do the dark things and see in those conditions what gets exposed and revealed about the human condition.
interesting.
Yeah.
And if you think about, I'm going to ask this question differently.
Okay.
Um, I sometimes ask people what song title, uh, you know, probably describes them the best, is the best description of them right now. But I want to twist it a little bit for you. When you're in the middle of these very extreme endurance things that you do, I used to do ultra distance running,
Oh,
right?
you
And
okay.
there are certain things I would think about while I'm doing it. It was often the same sets of patterns, or sometimes it was just literally counting steps. I never had music playing in my ears. It was almost meditative.
Yeah.
So what is there anything running through your head that is like the soundtrack
Mm,
of endurance? Like when you're on a stepper for 24 hours,
yeah.
the Antarctic, you're thinking, I've got to wrestle this sled out now.
Yeah.
You're occupied. But when you're on a stepper for 24 hours, is there a soundtrack running through your head that helps you to hold focus?
Yeah, great question too. I'd say there's many mantras I use, but two that stand out is this moment is the masterpiece. Whenever I'm deep in that pain cave, which you can relate to as an ultra runner, that moment is why you were there. When you're in the moment you want to quit, that's the moment it's all about. So reminding myself that this moment is its masterpiece. And the other is this kind of what I would call my core philosophy statement is the path to inner peace is the pursuit of a worthy and loving inner war. So saying that this is the inner peace, this war is what is the pathway to inner peace, coming back to the sacred edge, right? You're
Just
on
say that. Just say that again. The
the
pathway to
path
inner
to
peace.
inner peace is the pursuit of a worthy and loving inner war.
That's a big statement. If people take the time to unpack that, that's a very big statement indeed. It's if you're going to run, if you're going to go and run a marathon or 100 kilometers or whatever, the thing you're waiting most for is to hit the wall
Yeah.
because that's when the run starts.
That moment is what it's all about.
And the other side of that is way easier than people think.
Yeah.
You just have to run through it. The
Yeah.
pathway to inner peace, one
Is
more
the
time.
pursuit the path to inner peace is the pursuit of a worthy and loving inner war.
And maybe the operative key word is loving
Yes.
in a war. Akshay Nanavati, I want to thank you very, very much. We've done this a couple of times. It's been enlightening every single time. And I hope people take the episode and dig into it and find for themselves what their spiral is, what their sacred edge is, and find their way of living with the dualities and then getting to oneness out of all of this. It's just been such a joy, Akshay, and I really, really appreciate you. And I look forward to the next time we're actually in a physical room together rather than a Zoom room.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, my friend. This was an
Thank
honor.
you. Thank you very much.